And I had one elephant come straight at me and just stop, forehead to forehead. And I was scared to death. I thought for sure this is the moment that I'm gone.
It put its forehead to your forehead.
Put its forehead, leaned over and just put its forehead right on my forehead. And I'm just like, don't move, don't move, don't move. It was a captive elephant, which in a way is more dangerous because there's a lot of trauma, right? Some complex PTSD with these elephants. I fought my baser instincts of running.
That voice you just heard was Dr. Michelle Szydlowski, and this is Dragonfly Conversations. Through this podcast, we highlight everyday people making a real difference in conservation and education. Today, Michelle teaches us how to listen to the unheard voices in conservation. She's an anthrozoologist who has worked with captive elephants in Nepal and champions neurodivergent voices in science. We talk about the complex ethics of elephant tourism, the sanctuary myth, and the universal language of curiosity that connects all species. All right, Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yes, let's get talking about anthrozoology. So this is the term that I associate with you, and we're used to thinking of anthropologists who study humans and human cultures, and then zoologists study non-human animals. What is an anthrozoologist?
Well, an anthrozoologist is sort of in between those two, whereas anthropologists do study animals. They do it in a very different way, and typically it's consumption-based as opposed to living along or with. And anthrozoology is really considering sort of all sides of the equation, right? So the relationships between the humans and the animals, well, I mean, humans are animals, but you know what I mean, other than human animals, and how those interactions impact the lives of both. You can't live exclusively without other animals, and you can't live without humans in most parts of the world now. So yeah, and my own version of anthrozoology, that sort of the way I was trained, is very much what we call a symbiotic ethics perspective, which is that all of my participants of any species are all ethically significant, morally significant. They all have a stake in the outcome, and all of them should benefit from research rather than research involving animals benefiting humans more.
So there's probably some things to unpack with that. And I know specifically your research with elephants, right? So thinking of them as participants in your research, I mean, can you get consent from an elephant? What do you mean exactly by considering them as willing participants in the research?
Well, in the beginning, it was because my research is not, lab research. So when I'm thinking about what a lot of people consider consent with animals in research, they're thinking about laboratory settings, right? Because I'm out in the homes where the places where these captive elephants live, it's a little easier for me to see them as the same sort of participant as I might. They're mahouts, they're elephant caregivers. So it is a little bit different than if I were working in a lab. I would probably take a different approach to my participants. But when I first started working with the elephants, my concern was for the benefit of the research, right? Why was I performing this research? Was it because I was curious about elephants, or did I really want to improve the lives of certain elephants, the lives of mahouts? What was my reason in being there? And it did come to pass that I was interested in improving the relationship between elephants and mahouts. I'm interested in improving the health and welfare of elephants, the health and welfare of mahouts, the relationship between elephant mahout dyads and the wider community, and then sort of the relationship with tourism and tourists in general. So lots of unpacking there.
So, okay. So for someone that doesn't really know about this idea of mahouts and elephants, like, what are you talking about? Where is this occurring? What is this relationship?
Great. Well, my research takes place in Nepal, which is a very tiny little Southeast Asian country that is sandwiched between China and India. So it shares a southern border with India. And they have a very long history with elephants. They've lived among elephants for 4,000 years or so. And traditionally, elephants were put into use for lack of a better term, were brought into communities to do heavy labor, like knock over trees, which is a natural behavior, or move a tree, or stomp through land to help clear it. And at that point, Nepal was a lot of little kingdoms. And so if you were good with elephants, if you sort of had a connection to elephants, there was a way for you to become essentially rich and famous, right? Because the king owned all of the elephants in the area. And if you were good with elephants, the king would call upon you and keep your lifestyle at a higher level because you were good with elephants. So that sort of went on for a long, long time.
It sounds like at the time it was an elite position.
Nepal has been a very caste-oriented system for, just like India, for a very long time. The Taru are low caste typically. And so it was sort of a perfect storm. The job of mahout stopped being a good job and started being a job where an uneducated person would work, where someone with no employment prospects might work. And rather than passing the job down from father to son like it had been for thousands of years, it became, I don't want my son to be a mahout. I want my son to get education and get a job with respect and money. So that left this gap in elephant keeping. And the only people that were willing to take mahout jobs were young, uneducated men who had not grown up around elephants. So they didn't have this embodied knowledge of elephants. They didn't have academic knowledge of elephants, and they didn't have any sort of experience with elephants. They just thought it would be a fun thing to do. So rather than getting information on elephant care and keeping from your parents and grandparents, you were now thrown into a situation with a very large animal and told, hey, take care of this large animal and don't let it kill any of the tourists.
Okay, so that yeah, sounds a little scary, but you have this great article that I came across called "Is Your Elephant Happy? How Identification and Description of Elephant Affective States in Nepal." And this came out, it says 2025, so it's
last year,
very recent. So I'm assuming this is the research you're talking about, and I'm curious, like, how are these young men at this point, like, based on your research, what can be done for them to connect with their elephants more, and for the elephants to be in a better position?
That's a great question. And that study is actually, there was part two. The first study was a health and welfare assessment, sort of to see how things are going and see how many experienced mahouts there are. After doing that research, I discovered that a lot of times there's some unwritten communication or unheard communication going on. And even sort of the least experienced mahout somehow was communicating with his elephant, right? So I set about to discover, what is it? How are they communicating? What is it that they see as communication? Is it what we would think of in the West as communication? And also how they perceive whether or not their elephant is healthy. Because if you ask a mahout, how's your elephant's weight? They will tell you their elephant is fat, like 99% of the time.
Okay, like
even
as a positive or like
as a
not good
no,
thing?
that she's overweight. She's an
Okay.
overweight elephant. It's just this sort of this perception, right? That the elephant is overweight. You ask them if they're healthy. Well, yes, but they could be more healthy, right? There were some sort of standard answers I was getting regardless of how the elephant looked. The elephant could have big open wounds and they might say, oh yeah, she's fine and healthy. And so I thought, what is this disconnect that is happening in Nepal? And so I started talking to really experienced mahouts and really inexperienced mahouts, and looking at how they were assessing the welfare of their elephant and how they were getting information on how to assess the welfare of their elephant, right? If they had grown up with no elephant experience and moved into elephant keeping, where were they getting this from? And while I was doing the background research for this study, I came across a lot of information from zoos that the longer the bond had been in place between an elephant and a keeper, the healthier the elephant was, and the greater sense of welfare the keeper had. So this having a long-term bond made keepers healthier and elephants healthier. And so what was it that it would take to sort of strengthen that bond in Nepal?
I love those examples you gave of folks assuming that the elephant's overweight, It makes me think of my dog, actually. When people come over, we always start apologizing for our animal. I'm not sure if that's exactly the scenario that's going on in your situation, though, but he seems overweight to us constantly. But yeah, what other ways like nonverbal communication can the elephants provide, things that they are maybe trying to communicate as highly intelligent organisms with individual personalities? I mean, were you able to also connect with those elephants at all in your work and see from their angle a little bit towards that anthrozoology lens we were talking about?
Mhm. It actually was really interesting because some of these elephants I had met back in 2012 when I'd first gone to Nepal for some other work. So I sort of was familiar with about 10 of my core elephant group. So I started with those elephants and the mahouts that was familiar with, and started watching the interactions, and then started asking questions about, is your elephant happy? I mean, that was the general question we'd ask the mahouts, and they would, without fail, except for one mahout, say yes. The elephant could have large open wounds, and they would say the elephant was happy. And so I had to dig a little deeper, because in Nepal, guest is God. So no one in Nepal wants to disappoint an outsider. So there's this perception that you should kind of be told whatever will make you happy. And so I thought maybe this is what is happening here. Maybe they're trying to tell me what they think I want to hear. So I dug down a little bit deeper past that and actually started looking into how the mahouts were reading the elephants and how the elephants were reading mahouts, and discovered that they had a ton of communication methods that they maybe weren't even aware of, right? So before I started this Is Your Elephant Happy study officially, I also decided that before I could do it, I needed to ask consent of my mahouts, which meant I had to ask consent of their bosses, the elephant owners, and I was going to ask consent of my elephant participants. And if I wasn't granted consent from the elephant participants, then I wasn't going to interact with them at all. So to do that, I had to really know how they were communicating. And elephants communicate in so many ways that, they're great. They have great sniffers. They can smell water like 20 kilometers away, right? And their skin is so sensitive. They can sense, if you touch an elephant's trunk, a change of 0.25 millimeters, tiny little changes in pressure. They are so sensitive. And of course, they're visual animals. They're movement-based animals. An elephant who's standing still is generally not a healthy, happy elephant, right? There's always some part of them moving. So this started me thinking about how I might ask consent. So I developed a process to ask consent from them. And as I was developing this process, I started chatting with people about why. People were asking me questions like, why are you bothering with this? Why are you so focused on this? And I started to realize that the reason was because I do the same thing when I am approaching humans. I don't have a good sense of getting humans. I don't have a good facial recognition. I don't have a good sense of necessarily emotions unless they're right on their sleeve. And so the same way I approached people, especially people in a different country, Nepalese people, is the same way I was going to approach my elephants. So I learned their communication styles, and that's what led to my asking consent of everyone. But that wasn't the question you asked.
Well, it's a beautiful answer, and it's so unique. And I'm sure it is, as a scientist, right? It's risky to do this sort of thing, right? Like, we increasingly recognize that elephants and so many species, primates and dolphins, are so intelligent, so aware. The concept of kind of getting their comfort level up and your comfort level with them, it actually makes so much sense, because you're noticing, you were presumably observing them. And I think about the early studies with primates, Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, who I don't know if they would, well, who knows what they would say, whether they say that they were seeking consent by sitting with these troops, but that's what they did. Mm-hmm. They were trying to sit with the troops in a way that I believe a lot of male scientists had not taken the time to do it in that way, to essentially get accepted into the group. So I think it's wonderful, but I do think it's risky, because like you said, I'm sure they might have been looking and been like, this lady is very strange, you know. So,
And I'm not sure that this would have flown quite as easily in other countries, right? Even
yeah,
other Southeast Asian countries, just because, patriarchal societies. I'm an older female. I'm an American female. I'm blonde in a country with no blondes, right? So there was a lot, I think, that made me stand out enough that in Nepal, they're like, oh, this is cool, right? Whereas some other countries, they might have been like, who is this person? What is she doing?
right. And you and I alluded to the, like, you know, because I've traveled in India a good amount, and we are sort of talking about different perceptions of animals and relationships with animals in different parts of the world. And
Right.
obviously in societies where there's Hindu culture
Mhm.
and vegetarianism is much more common, and even the holiness of many animals, and elephants as a part of that, with a deity of Ganesh and all the connections beyond that even. So it is interesting how you maybe felt a little more like is perhaps accepted a little bit
Mhm.
there.
Well, and I think that the difference that I learned through the elephants, through my work with rhino, what I'm learning now as I'm looking at dogs and cats in the areas of Nepal, is that the animals that live in the area beyond the humans are not seen as something separate from us. They're all part of a multi-species community. So there isn't that sense of you belong out there and I belong in here. There's a sense of we all belong. And I think that's difference in behavior following the COVID pandemic, right? These communal nations reacted very differently to COVID and switched into a protection of everyone mode. Whereas I think a lot of us living in the West switched into a protection of my family and I kind of mode. So it
Mhm.
was really interesting to see, again, these communal communities, for lack of a better word, approach things very differently. And so I think that that's part of it, is that if a rhino walks down the middle of the street, nobody's saying that rhino shouldn't walk there. They're saying, look, the rhino has still decided to walk down the street, even though we're being really loud here. So I think going into it with that was nice, but it was also problematic because you think that in a place that has a sacred animal or a deity related animal like Ganesh, that you see a lot of deferential treatment. Like people come to visit the elephants to make offerings and to ask, for assistance. So you would expect that elephants were very well treated and
Yeah.
well cared for. And so to see animals, especially tourism elephants, being abused was sort of messed with your mind a little
Yeah.
bit until you can sort of dig a little deeper and realize that, Ganesh was sent to help humanity. And so there's this perspective on sort of forcing the elephant to help humanity. It's a different relationship. It's problematic, just like a lot of our relationships in the US are with the other animals. But yeah, it's been really interesting.
But I want to be careful with Westerners listening to this, and we judge, right? We're like, oh my goodness, this is so awful. Whatever maybe people might be thinking, right? I mean, how do you deal with this now? Like, I have this sort of idea of this like sanctuary myth that, you know, sanctuaries are good, and, you know, riding elephants is bad or whatever is the thing. But like, it's all blurred now. And even like you said,
Mhm.
national parks and settlements where rhinos and humans are living in close proximity. And what is wild now? What is actually like a
Right.
wild elephant or a wild rhino? I mean, so there's probably a couple questions there. I think the first thing I want to get your sense on is like Western judginess of, of these things. What have you noticed, and how do you combat that?
Well, it was really challenging because when I first went to Nepal, I went to study rhino
Mhm.
and I fell into elephants. And one of the problems that I had when I said I want to study elephant mahout relationships was that people who were there as advocates, typically Western advocates, said that you don't need to talk to the elephant owners. The elephant owners are evil people. They just want to use the elephants. Oh, and you don't want to talk to the mahouts. The mahouts are bad people. They abuse the elephants. And I said, how are you getting anything done? If you have these views of all these people that you refuse to work with, how are you helping elephants? And then I would go talk to the mahouts and the elephant owners, who luckily I'd met most of them as individuals before knowing what they were or if they owned an elephant. And they said, how can you talk to those advocates? They're messing around in a country that's not their own, and they don't understand our perspective, and they're terrible people. We need to run them out of the country. And then I started talking to organizations, and the organizations would say, we do what is best for the elephant. They don't. And then I'd go to the next organization and they would say, we do what's best for the elephant. They don't. And so I approached my initial foray into research from an ordinary ethics perspective, which is that we all believe we are doing the right thing. And we try to do that, right? We say, oh yes, I'm doing what's best for my children. And to somebody that might mean spanking them regularly, right? To keep them in line. And somebody else might think that that's free range parenting. They all think they're doing the right thing, but it doesn't agree. And so maybe there isn't a right thing. Maybe it's all dependent on your perspective and which part of this multi-species community you live in.
And being aware of it, that and those different perspectives, and at the same time probably trying to ensure some basic levels of and standards of care. And the one thing that's positive is that there's all these groups that in theory are trying, maybe have different ways of feeling their success or criticizing others. So yeah.
Well, I was just going to add that it also depends on what you're looking at. Like the elephant owners in Nepal are the richest of the rich, right? They're hotel owners. They've got a lot of family money. They've been in the area a long time. So you might say, well, then why aren't they doing what's right for the elephant? Well, guess what? They're businessmen, and they are doing what is right for a businessman and his family. So they are achieving these goals. And part of that goal is having an elephant that you treat like a Jeep, right? You keep it in the garage, keep it full of gas. It brings money into your family. So it also is what your perspective, what is good, right? To your question about the sanctuaries and the sanctuary myth, I think that much like with killer whales, people have a tendency to think, oh, if we just sort of let these elephants go, they could go back and have a lovely life. And once you realize that that's impossible, we start thinking about a sanctuary situation, right? Is there a place that we can take these captive elephants and put them in a camp and let them live a life that's at least a little bit more natural than the one they're living now? And in most cases, that's an impossibility for a lot of reasons, one of which being that elephants, like middle-aged women in the United States, do not want to just be thrown into a situation where they have to live with a bunch of other middle-aged women, because they're not all going to get along, right? And so having a big amount of space, which is what a lot of people who promote sanctuaries are thinking, let's get a lot of space. We'll put up some chain-free corrals, or we'll let all these elephants go. They'll be happy and we're done. And that's just not a reality. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is to get people thinking in a little bit different way. There is one sanctuary in Nepal right now that's a true sanctuary that has 2 elephants. And they're working on making some connections with other people in the area to help have smaller groups of elephants be living a little bit more free life. And I think that's the direction to go. So when you find an ethical place, even if it's a smaller situation, realize that's really more of where we're going, because most of the wildlife, the endangered species, don't have a place that they can go back to. We're taking the wild away faster than we're thinking about where to put a lot of these, especially, mega herbivores, where are we going to put them? So sort of stop thinking about this, let them all go, let them all be free, and start thinking more of, as a friend of mine put it, nurses in a concentration camp, right? Make the day-to-day life better, improve welfare, improve health, better food, more agency, more socialization. Start with these little baby steps. And that's how we get to a place where we're supporting healthier, happier elephants.
I want to hear you talk just a little bit before we start to segue into teaching and things like that about your rhino work. How is that differed from your elephant connections, and what differences do you notice in the species and people's relationships with them as well?
When I first went to Nepal, I was actually fascinated because I had talked to a lot of people that work with orphanages, a lot of Nepali people who work with orphanages, And I worked with a lot of government people that work with orphaned wildlife. And so I thought, oh, this is fascinating. A lot of times orphan wildlife is treated much better than orphan humans. And then I started to discover that there's a lot of overlap. A lot of human orphans were orphaned because of human wildlife conflict. So that was my initial thing. I was hanging out with a lot of orphaned rhino and a lot of orphaned humans, and just looking at the perspectives and also like what their lives might be like when they grow up, right? Who had more agency as an adult? Well, guess what? It's the rhino. And that was really interesting. And then I got invited to a stable by another researcher who was looking at 3 particular mahouts. And I sat there for the day with that person and said, oh, good grief, I have to switch to elephants. And what I soon came to realize is that, like, I use this dog cat perspective, right? Horses are cats, donkeys are dogs, okay? Rhinos are cats, elephants are dogs. Rhinos don't care if you're there. They don't care if you're in their way. They're just going to walk that way anyway, and you better get out of the way, right?
So that's what you mean by the agency as if
yeah.
Okay.
They just, and they don't care. They just don't, they're not concerned with what's around them because they're doing their own thing like cats do, right, in the house. Whereas the elephants are actually super curious about you. They want to walk over to you if you smell funny, and they want to know why your hair looks different, and they want to know what you're carrying. And so they're more like the dogs in our Western perspective. They want to run up to you and see what you're doing. And I had one elephant come straight at me and just stop, forehead to forehead, and I was scared to death. I thought for sure this is the moment that I'm gone.
It put its forehead to your forehead.
Put its forehead, leaned over and just put its forehead right on my forehead. And I'm just like, don't move, don't move, don't move. And it was a captive elephant, which in a way is more dangerous because there's a lot of trauma, right? Some complex PTSD with these elephants. I fought my baser instincts of running.
What do you think it was trying to communicate or do?
I think it knew because she had seen me around town. Her name was Pinky. I think she was curious. What was I doing at these stables? Why did I smell like all of these other elephants? Why did I walk past so many times a day? I'm sure occasionally she had seen me carrying lovely bananas and some melons and thought, oh, this could be a friend. But I think most of all, it was just curiosity. She was one of the few elephants that could roam around her stable off chain all the time. And so she's just like, oh, look, someone's here. I'm going to go say hello. And I think, again, that elephants, back to the asking consent, they not only read our external kind of emotions, but I think we give off so much sensory data about our attitude and our personality and what we want and our stress levels that I think they know curiosity from ill intent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's why you also will get elephants that, in zoos don't like a particular keeper. Something's happened in the past. They pick up a lot of data. And so I think they can identify when you're there for a friendly purpose, as it were.
It sounds so from an outsider perspective, listening to you, like I'm jealous of this research because like to have these close connections, I'm sure it's not all easy, really difficult.
It's heartbreaking.
But in your day job, you work for Miami University Project Dragonfly and you're instructing many students. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. What has it been like for you engaging? Because we have a lot of, as you know, zookeepers or animal care specialists, I guess we should use terminology is shifting in some cases. And we also have this elephant affinity group that's doing some cool work of getting people having these discussions. So yeah, how's it been for you? It's been a few years now.
It's been great. Yes, this is my 3rd year. And I think what drew me to Project Dragonfly is that it is the master's program I wish I had found when I was doing a master's program. It's just really nice that we have a lot of people from different walks of life and different perspectives on other species that we can somehow all come together and work together and learn from each other. I'm a lifelong learner and I love to learn new things. So whenever I have somebody, my first semester I call the lanternfly semester because I knew nothing about lanternflies. And I learned so much that semester, and it was so cool that there's this thing I never thought of, right? So every semester there's some new species or new area of the country or the world that I have not been to. So I love to learn all of that. Just soak that all up.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't get old. And I teach our pollinators course, and it's fun for me because my background is with Eastern bees in
Mm.
New York City and where I did my dissertation in Chicago, but I get to hear about Western bees, California
Hmm.
bees. So yeah, it does kind of keep it interesting. And also, I mean, I think of you as being engaged in like social action, and I believe you got I saw somewhere an award, British Council Social Action Award for your work.
Hmm.
And I also think of you being involved with supporting neurodivergent learning and inclusion and such. So yeah, what about all that?
That's a lot. Well, the social action award really came from the fact that I've always done a lot of mentoring because I was a high school teacher and a history museum teacher before I was a researcher. And so I like students and I really like communicating with students. And so as I went through my master's program, there was not a lot of support for people, especially people from non-traditional backgrounds, older people, people from different countries, people studying in a language that wasn't their own. So I sort of just started connecting people as I was connecting to my own sort of peer group. And that became a mentoring relationship. And then when I would travel to Nepal, I would meet students who were really interested in going to college. So I would mentor them through college. And, that's what eventually led to the Anthrozoology as a National Practice Student Conference, which is essentially one big mentoring opportunity. I just really enjoy that connectivity. And so I have a lot of students in a lot of different countries that I work with, not beyond my own students, of course, but but also beyond that. And that has led also to my own journey post head injury, to my diagnosis of being on the autism spectrum and how that impacted my later studies and how that impacted my research and how that impacted my research. It's perceived and how what issues students face if they're somewhere on the autism spectrum, especially the extra challenges that could present, but then also the superpowers. A lot of neurodiverse folks have some really great superpowers, like, hyper focus and organization. And there's a lot of really cool things. And in my case, it was approaching my participants that weren't human in a way that meant I had to learn how to communicate with them. I had to read their faces, just like I read human faces. I had to learn to understand, bodily clues that weren't obvious to me. So, yes, it's been really nice. So I try very hard to make sure that there's a lot of support for neurodivergent people in higher education, employment, and as students, and then especially, as that pertains to people who are interested in the same field as I am.
Right. Yeah. And it's that diversity of thinking and approaches is so important because we kind of live in these paradigms. We all just kind of emulate each other and whatever that just kind of leads to the same thing happening over and over again. Whereas you're reading the elephants. I love that. And thinking about it that way for your personal connection, really impactful and really unique research. You also have a book. So you've been doing a lot of things. Okay. So what in a nutshell, tell us about the book. I also want to hear about the conference you help run a little bit. So,
all right. Well, the book came out of my PhD studies because there's not a lot of research out there in Nepal because it's a tiny little country with a tiny little amount of elephants and an even tinier amount of captive elephants, right? So a lot of people, they want to go to Thailand and look at elephants. And there's also this perception that what happens in Thailand with elephants is what happens in all countries with elephants. And nothing could be farther from the truth. Nepal is very different in that, owners own elephants, mahouts work with elephants. There's no mahout owners, right? It's a different
yeah.
way of stabling. In Nepal, elephants live alone. They have no physical contact with other elephants most of the time. There's no elephant camp situation. There's very little veterinary care. So the book really came out of me wanting to let people know that you can't look at, just like we couldn't look at a zoo in the United States and judge all zoos by that zoo. We can't look at elephant keeping in India or Thailand and say, oh, that must be how all Southeast Asian countries keep elephants. So I wanted to share that a little bit. I wanted to share some of the struggles that captive tourism elephants go through, especially because there is no, need for a captive tourism elephant. It's not a life-changing, a life-saving experience for a human. So I wanted that. And one of the ways that I chose to do that was through biography. So there are 3 biographies in the book, and then I've written some further biographies.
What is the title of the book?
It's called Elephant Tourism in Nepal: Historical Perspectives, Current Health and Welfare Challenges, and Future Directions.
Gotcha.
Yes, elephant tourism in Nepal, coupled with my last name, get you everywhere you need to be.
Got it. Well, that seems like a really great addition to the literature. And I know also there's efforts in thinking about chain-free corrals and some standard, like you said, standards of care and how elephants are cared for in different ways and kept separate or not. So I think there's going to be so much good work to be done ongoing with this. And then your anthrozoology conference you run as well, or you're involved in.
Yep. Anthrozoology as international practice. And we welcome any student, undergraduate to postdoc or in between programs, to come to our conference, which is all hybrid, online, free, to sort of practice their science communication skills in a non-threatening sort of way. So we will mentor students, especially students who are presenting in a language that's not their birth language, to get them through scientific presentations so that they can have the confidence to go to a big conference and share their work, because that's the only way that we're going to get a lot of this information, especially from smaller countries, out into the wider academic lands. I mean, we're missing out on a lot of data by not including students, and especially students not from the global north.
That's amazing. And on very important topics, like we've said, and with interesting approaches, as an ecologist and someone's, I read the typical journals, right? But the anthrozoology perspective is really unique to me and really refreshing. I'm looking at your list of authored articles, and you have one that has a subtitle, Stories of Young Rhinos in Nepal. And I'm just like, this sounds like such an interesting read. You have another one recently, From Dogs to Frogs, a summative analysis of scholarly contributions to anthrozoology.
We were really curious people associate anthrozoology with different things depending on what country you come from. Like anthrozoology in the US is very different than anthrozoology overseas. So we looked at all of the journals and to see what topics came up, and it was really interesting.
Well, Michelle, we're just about at time. I do have some dragonfly reflection questions I like to ask. In the program, we like to reflect a lot. So the first one is is there any time in nature you've had in the last week or two that kind of just sparked some joy or some good feelings for you?
I get really excited out in nature. And in Florida, there is a Gumbo Limbo Nature Preserve, which is a lot of open space, and they do a lot of turtle and fish rehab and rescue. And I went to visit my grandson, and we went there, and we're standing up on this brand new observation point, and there was a red cockaded woodpecker on this tree, and I'm yelling, "It's the red cockaded woodpecker!" And my grandson is great. He's of course, where? And pretty soon, you've got a bunch of people behind us. What are you looking at? Where is it? And I'm just like, oh, it's so cool. So they're an endangered species in Florida, and they like the old dead trees, and so it's just like a perfect sort of endangered species moment. So those are the things that I get really excited about.
How old is your grandson?
He's 6.
Yeah, prime.
Oh yeah,
animal fascination, excitement age.
Yes, I love the walking along and all of a sudden just drop down on the ground, flat on your stomach, looking at something. That's the way we should all be.
Yes, we should. All right, here's another question. Is there a spark in your life that led you to this career, do you think? Maybe when you were younger or maybe even later, but is there a moment you can identify like that?
Well, I always was an animal lover, and my mother grew up on a farm, and I think it's fair to say she wanted to get as far away from animals as possible. And so, I was the one that was always looking for critters outside. And I lived in Colorado, and there were a lot of tiger salamanders at that point in Colorado. And in our window well, we had tiger salamanders. And I used to go open the curtains, and I would just stand there on my little stool and watch the tiger salamanders. And then I got creative and I started building like popsicle stick slides and things for the tiger salamanders in my window well. And I think that's really where that, kind of observation happened, right? I thought, oh, there's a whole world was right outside my little window, 4 square foot area that is fascinating. So I think that's really was the moment.
Yeah, that does seem very impactful. Salamanders are so cool. Tiger salamanders, especially, but caring for them, right? And then being so close to your house so you could like see them each day.
Well, and me feeling like I was actually doing something for them, right? Like I know now, clearly they were not interested in my popsicle stick slides, but
is there, so this last question, is there something in your career that you're really, really proud of, that you feel you've made a difference? I mean, you've alluded to so many things like mentoring international students and bringing these issues to light with animal care.
it's all so meaningful, right? I think anytime you can try to support somebody else who's trying to make a difference, right? That's very meaningful. I think it's been meaningful to be active in Nepal and have, a lot of, there's no good way to say this, but a lot of women my age that travel internationally solo do so sort of for parachute conservation activities. And I think it was important for a lot of people in the areas I go to see that's a very kind of Western woman thing for them to do, and for them to see that not everyone is like that, kind of set that example. I think bringing stories of tourism elephants out there is important, but probably the best thing is just inspiring, my grandson, right? He sees me be a total animal nerd, and he's a total animal nerd. And so that's a highlight.
Love it. Love it. And Michelle, it's been great having you on the Dragonfly team. And thank you so much for being a part of our community and doing all these wonderful things. And thanks for joining today on the podcast. Hi there, folks. Just one more thing before you head out. If you have a moment, like, follow, share this podcast. It really helps get the word out about Project Dragonfly and hopeful conservation. And I would love to hear in what ways you are finding this podcast useful, how you listen, what you would like to hear more of, less of, etc. Please feel free to send me any and all feedback, any ideas for guests to Kevin Madison at my email, which is mattiskc@miamioh.edu. That is spelled MATTESKC@miamioh.edu. Thanks again for listening and have a great day.